Hello. As you're landing on this video, I just want to preface this video and this statement saying that I don't mean any flippant to be flippant with this title or this subject matter, and nor irreverent. But sometimes it takes like a little bit of humor just to make an appealing title. I don't go into the analytics on this YouTube. But it's clear that the phrasing and the presentation of a video, including the title, it's important for engagement. It's part of the video, and the craft of being a YouTuber or content creator is the presentation, no less than the title. But then also that it's actually this is I thought of a metaphor for statements that I made on previous videos that could enunciate, I think, clearly what I meant to, and I was kind of amounting to some of this, but and in reviewing one of the videos, I thought how I could present it more clearly, which is that so if you so I had mentioned at least four awesome no, I mentioned at least six awesome names in my title about the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and then that series, and this is like an intended follow up to that series. So I mentioned Maha Brahma, great Brahma, Maha Vishnu, great Vishnu, and Maha Shiva, or Shiva, Maha Shiva, great Shiva, and these are and I also mentioned Chitgana, the greater of those, as I understand, and the part of those, but yet great within, prompting within and beyond those awesome persons would be Chitgana. And then I also mentioned just a little tongue in cheek, King Greg the Terrible, King Caesar, and then what may not have understood itself to be a genie, even though that genie that genie's given name is an appearance in a description verbatim of the word genie. So I just wanted to say that actually, but it's actually illustrative because, and I also mentioned Joe on that. Don't forget about Joe. So you have Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, Chitgana, and then you have Caesar, Greg, Genie, and Joe. And the latter four are at least three stooges, and then maybe a patron of the stooges would be the greater. And actually, as that might be humorous, but you could almost say that those four awesome persons that I began this saying could also be three great persons, and then a patron, no less, to substantiate and validate and authorize the activity of the other three. And then so as us kids, you had the awesome Joe, who patronized and subsidized the ego, entitlement, and self-confidence of three stooges who may have been equally in love with her. She may have loved one or both or all of them more or less, but they no less probably loved her equally. And also, us being human beings is that we're not entirely different from what is great in this universe. And what is great in this universe is yet invested in us, cares for us, loves us, expresses through us, and we get combined to form a composite aggregate, or what's we call in psychology a gestalt, which is that what is great is yet composed of us. What is great collectively is composed of us respectively, and what is collective is greater than what is respective. Yet what is collective is not collective without all in its with all that is respective. So we as small mortal agents of something incredible, beyond description, and I think that means inscrutable. It means you can't understand something, and then inexpressible is like beyond description, and that's what a lot of what we're trying to enunciate when we use different awesome titles, even some of the ones that I've said. But I think that one of, and no less than God and the Devil, would be yet still somewhat descriptive of what is beyond description. But maybe a closer pass at saying what is great would be when you say Chit Gana, because Chit means consciousness, and I think Gana means great or beyond. And that was from that appeared in a footnote of one of the works of Arthur Avalon. Don't look past the footnotes in anything you're reading. However, sometimes footnotes aren't healthy to read because you have to squint so much to scrutinize the footnotes. That I read the works of Arthur Avalon over a couple of years a lot of his books with the footnotes, and I actually went into painstaking details observing the footnotes, and I received a little bit of injury. It was hard for the eyes, and for a while after that, for several years, I actually couldn't get through a lot of reading because of it would start to hurt, and it was because I had been going over those footnotes like that. So maybe with this video, you don't have to look into the footnotes to get some of the value. So they're insightful, but be careful around anything of small print, just for reference. Anyone interested in reading, that small print is not healthy for us. But what I wanted to say is that so maybe a really profound word is this chidgana, and I don't think that necessarily. I don't mean to appropriate that or bastardize that in speaking that name outside of the context and heritage that it is birthed from and that it sustains, and that maybe pays homage to that name. But the concept in itself is almost limitless, such that a person of a different culture, heritage, background, experience can, or even faith, can level that word and appreciate that word without necessarily appropriating or bastardizing anything. When you say massive or massive consciousness, transcendent consciousness, there's nothing arbitrary about that or limiting about that, which is the greatness of it. And so it's so when you say that, I said in any of those other things, any of those other names I've said so far, the Stooges, the Great Patron, and then even the awesome figures, no less than Maha Brahma, Maha Vishnu, Maha Shiva, and God and the devil. Some of those, they may have a little bit of limitation, simply in that you can describe something. If you can describe something, it is yet limited because you're at once limiting it with your description. And should your description actually be accurate, you have described something that is yet limited, because there's no description without limitation. Because how can you, the very word description, describe, you're taking something down into writing, and you're thereby limiting it because you're expressing it and fixing it. So if it can be described, I think it can be limited, or it is limiting. And then if it cannot be described, that is exactly what is awesome. And so it's been said, I think, like in the Jewish faith, that we are not to create a likeness or like image of what is beyond, because simply to do so is to begin to affront or blaspheme, or sometimes when we imitate things, we somewhat blaspheme them. It's like if you had a child, and that child dresses exactly like you go to work as a police officer, and that child wears a police uniform, not being trained as a police officer and not working as a police officer, that child somewhat knows that they're not a police officer. And on a certain level, as much as that they are endearing themselves to you, honoring you by being moved by you enough to imitate you, they're yet somewhat mocking you in that moment, even your own child. In that they're putting on your pretension and air without your background or competence, and on a level they know that even as a small child. But it's similar with other things, where when we sometimes when we pay homage to something, or when we replicate or imitate something, there is something a little bit distasteful and disrespectful in absolute terms. And you could almost reason that making any awesome name, even some of the ones I started this video with, you are somewhat blasphemous to begin to describe what cannot be described, because you are attempting to limit something that is essentially incredible and free. And so it's even similar with a lot of the things that label us, that describe us, whether that is case notes by a doctor, different numbers assigned to us in the school system, in the employment, almost anything that can describe us or describe something, an attribute about us. It is on a level disrespectful, because it is limiting and saying, this is what you are, this is what you have been, this is what you can be. And just that statement smacks distasteful to something that is awesome and incredible and limitless and free to yet define, redefine, and undefined, as is inspirational. That is what is great and beyond that we approach sometimes, but that is yet also some of us, because we are of what is beyond, and we are composed of what beyond, and we are endowed with a dimension or with a degree of what is beyond. But we're never absolute and really approaching what is beyond until we are both collective, together, when we can respect each other for being different, and we can also be great for being different. But to be both together and different is what's so awesome. There's been many heinous atrocities around communism. There's been many heinous atrocities around capitalism. But what it would be greater would be to be both collective and respective, heterogeneous and homogeneous. The Heterogeneous means different and respective. Homogeneous means one whole and indistinguishable. And you actually need both. It's the dynamicism of having both that makes life valuable. If we were all the same, if we were all like each other, life wouldn't work. Yet if we were all completely different and nothing alike, life also wouldn't work. But the beauty is in difference within similarity and similarity within difference. That's dynamic, therefore balanced, therefore viable, therefore life. So you have these great figures. You have the Three Stooges interested in a beautiful girl named Jo in elementary, that story that we were. And then you also have these persons, these figures, but they can yet be described. So they are yet not entirely limitless, because they can yet be described. And they also are endowed with recognizable characteristics, which is awesome, but yes, also is limiting, because if you are characterized by something, you are somewhat limited by that character. A character can only do what a character can only do in a story of some kind. So what I wanted to say is that, one is that I didn't mean to be flippant by making an analogy between us different boys who had a crush on a girl. You have one that was somewhat destructive. You had one that was creative by letting things go free. So you had Greg the Terrible, who was a bully that I grew up with. Then you had Caesar, which was another young person that I grew up with, who let things go and was simply cool just by letting things be. And then you also maybe somewhat greater, and which I'm equating to Brahma in being creative. The first one being destructive, which destruction is not a bad thing in itself. And then you have one that was a little bit more forgiving, and that was similar to me, being that I was always more so agreeable even I was always more so agreeable. I had a little bit of a temper when I was young, but I was also agreeable and forgiving and loving, and I would do just about anything for anyone and bring them the world, including that girl Jo, if I could have gotten away with that. So I'm equating myself to like a genie, but also I don't meant to be putting myself in the same word with something like Vishnu, but Vishnu would be something of what's like a bodhisattva. And a sattva, sattvic, that is the redemption within reality and also within beings. And that if you appreciate these three dimensions, the activity, causation, amounting to cause and effect as a property immanent, transcendent within reality itself. And then you have destruction, and then you have forgiving. So you have destruction, which would be like self-interest. And then you have forgiving, big-heartedness, and recognition of similarity with recognizing one in another is compassion and forgiving and grace. And so you need that the creation, the causation, the motion, the destruction, and also the grace. And that amounts to, but that's not ultimate in itself. So what I wanted to say is that perhaps these three figures, so this dynamism, and then I also said that the U.S. Constitution may have been borrowed and appropriated from a group called the Anansi, also known as the Iroquois Indian, according to the eminent Grand Sheikh Taj Tariq Bey, who is a scholar and an eminent figure. And it's said, he has enunciated that there are understood to be balances within nature, dynamic balances that make nature viable, and we as human beings are yet composed of and transact within the boundaries and balances of nature at all times. And no less than our behavior, conduct, and speech, and even very thought is within the balances and dynamics of nature. If I'm sitting around entertaining violent thoughts about other people, loving people, that is not. If I'm entertaining a violent attitude or intention toward another person, whether that person is with me or not, that yet has a consequence in something as fine, minute, and nuanced as this reality is, to where whether I'm actually acting out on that yet, or just simply having that regard in my heart, my behavior is changing, my rate of breathing is changing, my different very, very, very fine, subtle things about my being is changing as I'm harboring and entertaining the intention or the contempt of another person to the point of injuring them, before or not I actually act on such. I'm yet being affected in my body by entertaining that, and my body is permeating and affecting the environment. So on a level, I have already managed to move against another person, or even myself, if I were to harbor a mal intent or true contempt for myself or another person, and therefore that is within the balances of nature, and nature also has checks and balances. So at one point I may actually experience a check of that at some kind, whether it's not something there's something called ideation. And so when I'm thinking different thoughts about people, I'm ideating about them or about myself, and that yet has consequence and weight in something as fine as this reality. So I just wanted to say that all that we say, do, and think is within the realm of nature and cause and effect. And so nature, cause and effect not being different, and so that's yet balanced. And so the Iroquois were aware of some of those balances that we exist in, and that's some of what our U.S. Constitution of greatness and renown is modeled on and appropriated from, and it maybe functions by and viable by as those checks and balances. So I wanted to say that maybe these figures, these Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva represent checks and balance. And so I want to say that if these really are awesome people, persons, and actually that dynamism, that combination of those very three functions of self-interest, big-heartedness, and motion, they actually, according to Arthur Avalon, fashion an environment and beings within that environment, and those beings' relationship to one another in that environment, and that environment and its relationship to those beings and one another are not different, and they are a mode of self-interest, big heart, and motion. And they can constitute and characterize something as those three interplay. But what I want to say is that perhaps a perfect example of what I'm talking about this is that a building structure. So you take a building. I worked for a building where I live that's famous for a lot of it's a famous building for a lot of people who are disabled where I live. And so many people who are disabled, and they receive support from the county, and they live there. They're able to live happy lives, but they're supported by different there's a lot of satellite professionals and paraprofessionals such as myself that come through there constantly. So you have a lot of disabled people and a lot of professionals that would come through there that would all be familiar with that building. So it's a significant building where I live, in the city where I live, and it has a lot of consequence and weight and function, that one particular building. And I've had beautiful experiences there with different elderly and disabled people that I spent a lot of time with in close proximity, caring for them, but also somewhat living with them. Because when you're spending 4 or 5 hours each evening with a person, cooking for them, watching TV with them, doing different little things with that, you're actually living with them in that way, whether or not you go to sleep there. And I only actually slept over at a person's house I was working with once, who was a terminally ill man with cancer. So I would attend him to different doctor visits, and a couple of times I think it required me to spend the night there. And sure enough, there were rats running around at night as I slept in this old house. So that was an experience in itself. And then there was some sketchy stuff going on in the middle of the night outside. But all I meant to say is that I wasn't spending the night at these different people's house, but I was yet living with them in a way. And that building, so I've had beautiful experiences there, and it's a beautiful building. But one thing you appreciate if you're around like a building, like maybe someone from other cities where people more so live in like buildings and high rises could appreciate this. But you have a necessity to level a foundation, which would be to destroy, knock it down, then you build it. So that destruction could be like Shiva. You can't create anything or get anything done without having destroyed something to do that. Then you have the building itself, the creativity, the motion, the causation, that would be like Brahma. And then you have the sustaining, the different graces and mercies and utility of a maintenance capacity, which would be like Vishnu. So what building can you imagine without something having been destroyed or leveled to the earth to build that? Then what building can you imagine without construction to have conceived it and got it built? And then also you have the maintenance. What building can you imagine without? Could you actually dare to imagine a building without maintenance of some kind? And how heinous that would be, and horrible that would be, and detrimental that would be without the maintenance. So you see how important all these. Now, had that not been leveled all the way to the ground clear, flush to the ground, to the bedrock, without the destruction getting done right, how viable would that building be? How dangerous could that building be? If that building had not been conceived and built properly at all levels of construction, from the very first brick to the last brick, how safe and potentially dangerous could that building be? If it's not being maintained properly, how safe and maintained and viable could that building be? So you see how those are all yet necessary. But then beyond that is that the very ground that supports that, because we've talked a lot of some faith would have something such as a holy trinity, which without bastardizing or appropriating anything, you could see how maybe these three figures, these three features of reality, causation, destruction, and maintenance, could be similar to what's known as a holy trinity of renown. But you actually can't have something such as a trinity of any kind, even a holy one, without something to initiate, activate, and also support that very trinity. All things need support, even a trinity, and that would be like what is beyond description is what is authorizing and really subsidizing all activity. There's something yet authorizing and subsidizing all activity and inactivity also, because it also takes effort to sustain inactivity. When you're loafing around and you're enjoying yourself somewhere, not doing a lot, like being somewhat lazy, there had yet been initiative and effort sustained, and graces and labors, and pains taken to afford you the ability or the opportunity to be inactive. So both activity and inactivity cost labor and stakes of pain are attendant of both activity and inactivity, and must be supported. So all these different activities, whether you think it's cool to destroy things, whether you think it's cool to build things, or whether you think it's cool to sustain things, most of us could maybe have our lives described as being reminiscent of one of those three figures, and yet and even our personalities also. But yet it took something greater and beyond that to sustain that. So when you go to this building, this high rise, you're not usually aware of who had owned that land that the building was on, and then who therefore subsidized all those other activities, the destruction, the building, and the maintenance. A lot of people would attribute the building itself to who had built it, but who actually owned the land and then yet subsidized the conception and the activity of building that building had been significant. And had they themselves shorted something, had they shorted an expense. There's a movie, Jurassic Park, where the great owner of the park was that we have shared no expense in creating and re-engineering these dinosaurs that are about to jack you up and bite your head off and spit in your face and eat your face with acid. He said that, he didn't say the other part, but he said that no expense had been spared. When he said that might be the greatest line in all of popular media. We have spared no expense. Whatever you're doing, whatever this video inspires you to do, or whatever you click off of it to go and do, spare no expense. That might be my greatest line, coming off of that greatest line, because we had to steal something to say something cool in the first place. But so that subsidy, that sustaining that land that the building and the analogy is built upon might be similar to what's called Chidgana as the real patron. Now, when you say God, the devil, or you say those other three awesome figures, you can't say one of them without implying or implications of the other one. You somehow, I think, you go to a faith setting and hear them commend what's called God. You can't help but to be attended by the thought of what would not be God if you're hearing that, because you're hearing about all the good things, all the righteous things. Well, we know life is not all that. So there must be something else that is being left out of that statement, or that is implied with that statement, or suggested by that statement, hinted at by that statement. But when you say Chidgana, massive consciousness, transcendent consciousness, there's nothing you're not referring to henceforth, prior forth, now, and forever. You're saying all that may now, or maybe yet exist when you say Chidgana like that. And it's almost beyond light and dark, good and bad, day and night. When you say that, there's nothing you're not saying with that. And so you almost don't even need to commend that. It's inscrutable, it's inexpressible, it's actually beyond worship. If you think about that, it's beyond it's beyond approach. It really is beyond approach, because to approach it would be to disrespect it and affront it, whether or not you did so in the affirmative or in the negative. So I want to say is that maybe that would be the analogy of what, like a holy trinity that is dynamic, just like rock, paper, scissors. You couldn't get by with rocks and paper. You couldn't get by with paper and rock or rock and scissors, you would be confounded, and you would the show would stop if it had just been rock versus paper. Paper would get over on the rock. Just rock versus scissors. Rock would get over on the scissors. Just scissors versus paper. Scissors would get over on the paper. But you let them play between the three of them, and they're gonna cuss each other out, and they're never gonna stop fighting, and they're never gonna stop creating, and they're never gonna stop fixing, and they're never gonna stop doing beautiful things and treacherous things, and therefore life is sustained and viable. Yet they're not gonna even get to be together and play or do anything or amount to anything without something overarching, without consciousness. What can we do, experience good or bad without consciousness? What can we do or experience past consciousness? I don't know that there's anything. And so when you're saying Chitgana, that might be where the buck stops there, and also where the buck starts there. And is all I'm coming with this. And then for us Three Stooges falling in love with this girl Jo, it might be similar, where we're never going to stop contending between the three of us. And then and so and the buck stops with the pretty girl, who really is the biggest, baddest, and the coolest. Once she says that's Murder She Wrote, and there's no more story, there's no more argument. So watch out around someone named Joe. But yeah, I hope this can be of value, and I just wanted to make that analogy to a building structure. That I think most of us can appreciate, that for a building you need destruction, creation, maintenance, and you also need someone to foot the bill, and to make the building viable. So I hope this is insightful, and I offer this with respect to all people, to all capacities, even the people that I'm citing for learning in this video, and then even myself being a member of my own statement or this universe, and yet having my own life subsidized, activated, and validated by something that is beyond by consciousness, and what is beyond consciousness, Chitgana. Peace.